verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in the danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. So how does a disciple deal with anger? We all deal with it. Anger. Every one of us deals with it in our life. Occasionally you'll hear someone say, I never get angry. Laugh at them. Yeah, I'm serious. Laugh at them, and you will see it immediately manifested on their face. We all get angry from time to time. Now, we express it in different ways. Some of us are like Mount St. Helens, all over the place. And others of us kind of have that seething, it's kind of like the teapot that just kind of sits on the stove and it starts to whistle and it gets a little more intense, but then it kind of backs off. There's different ways we express that anger. Some of us have learned to stuff it and pretend it doesn't exist. In fact, I think in the church we've kind of counseled people to do that sometimes in ways that's unhealthy. We all deal with anger. You will see anger in numerous ways. You see, we're all irritated by things that happen in life. People that say stupid things. People who hurt us. People who threaten us. Situations that are difficult and that we don't like and that are just downright bad places to be. Circumstances of life. There are all kinds of things that hurt and wound and that are just unpleasant. And when we're in those places, we begin to feel the passions well up within us. Happens to all of us. How do we deal with it? That's the point that Jesus wants us to get out of this text. How does a disciple deal with its anger, with his or her anger? We live in an angry world, and it's not hard to have anger stirred up within us. Entertainment. How do you have a good drama without a little bit of anger? Think about it. Whether it's the old soap operas of days gone by, or whether it's reality TV. There's always somebody getting angry at this one and blankety-blankety, name calling and throwing tables and, there's pulling hair and all kinds of crazy things going on, and we sit there and we're entertained by it. And you think, oh, well, I don't watch those kind of shows, Pastor. I just watch the news channel. Oh my goodness. Because the truth of the matter is, politicians use anger to get us excited and to motivate us. And so do the news networks. Because if they can get us all excited and riled up about something, the ratings get bigger and better. Know it. People use it all the time. And anger, when it's left alone, will grow. It becomes a vicious cycle that ultimately, Jesus says, in the end, it leads to what? Murder. It doesn't usually get quite that far, but there's a cycle that goes on, and it starts out with that little passion that we begin to feel. And then if we indulge it, if we allow it to be fired up and stirred up within us, it gets a little bit harder and a little bit more difficult to deal with, and it becomes things like contempt and malice and abuse and violence and ultimately murder. We all have to have contempt toward each other. I see that too much with politics, and you can disagree with people, but you should not have contempt. Don't allow the anger to be fueled up within you. It's just not worth it. Or if you were like me, lived in LA for a while and had to drive in traffic, road rage, and we all felt it. I mean, you get stuck in traffic sometimes for hours. You just get irritated. It doesn't matter who you are, it's hard to deal with. Or I had to admit, a couple of weeks ago I had to make a phone call. Those customer service phone calls. And it was to a government agency nonetheless. And so, which makes it even worse. They had screwed something up on the bill. And so I called them up. And of course, what happens? You go through telephone Hades for a while trying to find the right person.
Yeah.
Put 1, 2, 3, 4, and none of them fit. It's like they give me 5 options, and none of them are what I want to call somebody about. And so I try every one of them, see if I can get somebody. And that takes me to another menu, and then it says, well, if you don't find what you want, then go back to the main menu, so you're back there again. After about 20 times, you finally get to talk to somebody, and by then you are so upset that you're just really ready to talk to them, right? And then you get somebody that you can't understand, and he doesn't understand what your problem is, and you can't seem to get anywhere, so they bump you up to somebody else, and by the time you're done with that crazy thing, whew, anger. We deal with it, don't we? We all deal with it from time to time. So we're going to look at what Jesus has to say about anger. I used to think I had anger under control and I got married. There's something about relationships. It's a lot more, it's easier when you're by yourself most of the time. But you start living with other people closely, and those little things just get you irritated sometimes. I admit it. There's anger. We all deal with it, don't we? I like what Frederick Buechner said about it. He said, of all the 7 deadly sins, anger is probably the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll your tongue over the prospect of bitter confrontations to come, to savor to the last toothsome morsel both the pain that you're given and the pain you're giving back. In many ways, it's a feast fit for a king. But the chief drawback is that what you're wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. Has consequences, doesn't it? So how do we deal with anger? I think Jesus has a very basic and simple answer for us that I think is actually quite profound. It might be best paraphrased, and I hope I got my volume turned up adequately here, by another prophet by the name of Barney Fife, if I can find it. Oh no, it went past. Don't do that to me. Oh my goodness, he's missing.
No Barney.
It's so good too. Where did he go? He's missing. Maybe I gotta give him
I say this calls for action, and now, nip it in the bud.
Nip it in the bud. Remember that? Barney Fife. Nip it in the bud. In a very real way, that's what Jesus is going to tell us. Settle matters quickly. Even if you're doing an act of worship, and it comes to mind that there's somebody that you got a problem with, You need to get that taken care of before you even do your act of worship. Nip it in the bud. Well, we're going to see what that means in just a little bit. I'm glad he finally showed up for me. So Jesus begins in this whole section by looking at the old way. The way he said the Pharisees and the old way of looking at righteousness, guess what they were all focused on? They were focused on the thing that we think we can all do just fine. Well, God said what we really need to do is not kill somebody, right? Do not murder. And he said, I'm good there. I'm not murdering anybody, no problem there. You've heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. Remember how Jesus said, I'm not coming to abolish the law, but I'm coming to fulfill the law? Well, he's going to give us 6 examples of it in the coming weeks. This is the first one. Notice he doesn't do anything to say that there's anything wrong with that law. Jesus doesn't say it's okay to kill somebody, right? He's not going to abolish this principle. But what he is going to do is he's going to simplify it. He's going to say, what is at the heart of the problem? What is the real issue here? I know that unless you're a psychopath, you're one of those people who never gets angry. Well, I'm just kind of joking with you here. You don't feel anything. You're probably not struggling with this commandment too much. But the key principle that lies underneath it, the anger where it begins, we all know that, and we all know it all too well. So he says, that's where the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the old way of looking at things, they focused on the part that they could do, of course, but they missed the heart of the problem. And so Jesus then goes from this old way of looking at it, and he says, but I tell you. He begins to give what I call the vicious cycle. He begins to describe how anger works and the cycle that it leads to ultimately murder and violence and those sorts of things. The vicious cycle. But I tell you, there's a saying, anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it's stored than to anything on which it is poured. Kind of like that. And so Jesus here I think what Jesus is doing in this text is not so much giving us more commands, as he's describing to us how we deal with anger in our lives in a positive way, so that it brings deliverance and ultimately healing and peace to relationships. And sometimes I think we look at these things and we think Jesus is just trying to make it hard for us. I think he's actually trying to give us a solution to the problem. He's saying, in essence, that we all experience anger, and it has all kinds of negative effects in our lives. And if we just try to ignore it and stow it away, it can lead to all kinds of things like ulcers and heart attacks and bitterness and physical abuse and numerous things that can go on in life. So we need to deal with it. We need to confront it head on. So Jesus says this, but I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, clearly Jesus is using some hyperbole here, okay? In other words, a figure of speech. Jesus himself calls some people, you fool. The Pharisees themselves. So, he's making a point here. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the point that lies underneath what he's saying here? He's saying the real problem is when anger gets out of control in our lives and it becomes contempt and ultimately goes to the next level, even to malice. And I'll show you what I mean by that as we look at this text. So at the very heart of what he's trying to say is not that, if I go around saying, Dick, Raka, I'm subject to judgment. It means nothing to us, right? Raka it was a word that they used, and we'll talk about what it means in just a minute. But that we would literally use that word has very little meaning to us. In fact, we could be just like the Pharisees and take the letter of the law, what Jesus said here, and say, well, I don't say that to people. And I don't call people fools, so I'm okay. That is to miss the point of what Jesus is saying here. The point is that when we allow anger to be indulged in our lives, and we lose respect of an individual, and we call them names, and we strike out at them, whether through words or physically, however we might express it, that we are giving way to anger in our lives, and that's the problem. That is the big problem that goes on in our lives. There's a vicious cycle. It's only going to get worse in our lives if we don't deal with it. And he wants us to deal with it. So, what is this word here, rakah? What's the big deal about that? Rakah is, let me do this one first. It's from the Aramaic. When Jesus was walking around on the earth, he probably spoke mostly in Aramaic. That was the street language of the people in Galilee at the time. Hebrew was what the scriptures had originally been written in, and that was a traditional language they would have still used in worship, and they would have known Hebrew. And Greek was the trade language of the day, and they could talk to people from all different countries using Greek. So many people knew all three of them, but the average daily use was Aramaic. And it's being translated into Greek here as rakah, but it's really the Aramaic word rikah, which basically is to call somebody an imbecile, a fool, a blockhead, or an idiot. I mean, it's that kind of an insult. It's to say that the person is just stupid, but with a little bit more of an edge to it, okay? And to the speaker of Hebrew, it would have brought to mind the concept of the Old Testament of what a fool was. And a fool was not just somebody who lacked mental abilities, but a fool was somebody who was a moral apostate, somebody who was in deliberate rebellion against God, who was a wicked person. The fool is the opposite of the wise, for example, in Proverbs. And here, so what we're doing here is we're basically saying this person is just an idiot. I've lost all respect for this person, and I'm calling them names, okay? And at the heart, I think, of what he's saying here, by using this term, is I've moved from anger into contempt. This was a way of expressing contempt for someone. I'll show you what I mean. One writer gets at this so well. He says this: in anger, I want to hurt you. In contempt, I don't care whether you're hurt or not. You see, we've lost respect for the individual. Or at least so I say. You're not worth consideration one way or the other. We can be angry at someone without denying their worth. But contempt makes it easier for us to hurt someone or to see them further degraded. And so, what is Jesus getting at here? When we allow anger to be indulged in our lives, it moves to something deeper, contempt. When I look at that person, and I no longer care whether they get hurt or not, my estimation of that person is lowered. I begin to think of them as something other than a person, and somebody who's worthy to be struck back at. I'm losing respect of the individual. And I think that's what we tend to miss in this, is that we just think, well, it is in part calling people names and degrading them, but it's going deeper than that. It's showing contempt for who they are. It's allowing anger to go deeper and become a more vicious cycle in our lives. And so we can't just do it by the letter of the law like the Pharisees would look at it. Now, to just kind of go a little bit further with this, he goes on to say this: today, of course, we wouldn't say rakah, but we might call someone a twit, a twerp, or a dork, or a nerd. And these are the gentler words in our vocabulary of contempt. When it really gets going, it becomes filthy. Our verbal arsenal is loaded with contemptuous terms, some with sexual, racial, or cultural bearing, others just personally degrading. They should never be uttered. name calling is at the heart of what he's getting at here. But name calling with contempt for an individual, where we're not just angry with someone, I'm trying to hurt that individual through my words, through my name calling. I've lost all respect for that person, and I call them the worst and most vile names that I can come up with. And the more I get angry and the more contempt I feel, the worse the names get. And they become very filthy and vile. And you ever go to the movies? Did you ever, you see it. I don't have to give you the specifics, do I? I don't think so. I think you know. Just something I thought was a wonderful point on this. He said this: recently, cultural observers have noted the overwhelming rise in the use of filthy language in our culture. And curiously, few have been able to find any grounds for condemning it, other than personal taste. How strange. Can it be that they actually find contempt acceptable, or unable to recognize it? Filthy language and name-calling is always an expression of contempt. The current swarm of filthy language floats upon the sea of contempt in which our society is now adrift. I thought that's prophetic. I mean, that is an amazing statement. Walk down the streets. I mean, I don't know about Arnold so much, but if you go down downtown Los Angeles, you hear every other word you hear has got to be bleeped out. It's amazing. There's some movies that they should be bleeping about every other word. And we're getting used to this stuff. And the younger generations are growing up and thinking there's nothing wrong with it. We're so far adrift from our foundations. The contempt that's underneath our words. So, first of all, don't show contempt for an individual. Don't allow anger to build to contempt, where I lose all respect for the individual and I call them the worst possible name that I can think of, and allow that name calling to continue. But more than that, he says, don't say, "You fool," because you'll be in danger of the fires of hell. So what is he saying here? Again, it's not murdering someone. Okay, that's right. That's subject to judgment. But so is contempt. And so is malice. And that's really what we have here. You fool is when malice is that next step from contempt, and where we vilify another person. You fool, said with the characteristic combination of freezing contempt and withering anger that Jesus has in mind, is a deeper harm than either anger or contempt alone. It's an expression of malice as well as contempt. The fool in biblical language is a combination of the stupid perversity and rebellion against God and all that sensible people stand for. He's willfully perverted, rebellious, knowingly wicked to his own soul. So this is a much deeper insult than what we realize, what Jesus is saying here. And at points, he recognizes the foolishness in the arguments of the Pharisees, and he calls them out on it. So it's not the literal use of this word fool that he's worried about, but it's the malice that we feel toward an individual that lies underneath this kind of name-calling that is at the heart of it. D. Martin Lloyd-Jones, a great British preacher, right, when he was writing on the Sermon on the Mount, said this about "you fool." This means an expression of abuse, a vilifying of a person. It means this bitterness and hatred in the heart finding its expression in words. To really want something bad to happen to another person. I mean, you've gone beyond just no feeling toward the person to actively wanting something bad to happen to that person. You see what he's doing here? He's taking it and he's saying if you allow it to continue in your life, it gets more intense and becomes more vile. It becomes worse and worse, and it builds up in your life, and it's going to have consequences. You can be sure of it. The vicious cycle starts with that flare of anger that we all feel. And unless we nip it in the bud, somehow deal with it in an appropriate way, it leads to contempt, which leads to malice, and we could go on to rage and violence, and ultimately, Jesus said, it leads to murder. the same seed. It all starts with anger. But Jesus says there's a way of deliverance. Therefore. This is the good part. This is the good part. Therefore. Here's the solution to this whole thing. If you're offering your gift at the altar, and remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Go and be reconciled to them. Then come offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, and your adversary may hand you over to the judge. And the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will not get out until you paid the last penny. He gives us two illustrations here. And the point of both of them is this. Nip it in the bud. Settle the matter quickly. You may have a brother or a sister. In other words, a believer. There might be someone, and there's something wrong between you and that person. They said something, they did something, and you're worshiping God and you're just getting into it. And the Holy Spirit brings it to mind. What do? Well, if we take Jesus completely literally, we will leave the service and go find that person. Or maybe they're in the service and we go find the person and we go find a quiet place and we resolve the issue. Because the resolution of that issue is more important than any other thing I can do. I need to settle the matter while it's still a bud, when it's still small. I don't want it to grow into something much greater that's going to have greater consequences, both in my life and their life, and probably in a whole bunch of people's lives. Because what happens is when this thing explodes, it gets out on everybody. We know that. So when you're worshiping and you know there's something wrong between you and somebody else, do what you can. As far as you are able. I know you can't control the other person. Jesus knew that too. But you do what you can do to make the thing right with that individual. Then you come back and worship again. You see how he's making it such a priority? And then he goes to the second illustration, which basically is this. It might even be an enemy. Somebody's going to take you to court. Somebody, he says, you better settle matters quickly. You better, while you're on the road, on the way to court, you better get things taken care of. I don't think that Jesus' point here has anything to do with about going to court in this particular text. His point is, as an illustration, get things settled quickly. As quickly as possible, make sure that you deal with the situation, or it's going to come back to haunt you. There are consequences to not dealing with it as quickly as you possibly can. In the good words of our prophet Barney, nip it in the bud. Again, D. Martin Lloyd-Jones. Not only are not to harbor murder and evil thoughts in our heart against one another. Not only that, but the commandment not to kill really means that we should take positive steps to put ourselves right with our brother. At the heart of it, Jesus says, at the heart of this command, when you bring it right down, not only should you not be angry and filled with contempt and malice, but you should do everything you can, as far as you are able, as quickly as it is prudent, to make amends with that brother, sister, or enemy. In any case, you go to them in love and try to be a peacemaker. Nip it in the bud. How do you do it? Basic principles that I think we gain from this text. A, commit to resolving the matter as quickly and fully as it depends on you. Use wisdom in your timing. There are numerous biblical injunctions that when you're hot-headed and when the passions are aroused, that you may not be in the right place and time to try to confront the issue, right? I mean, wisdom rules here. But when you've calmed down a bit and you're able, then it's time to deal with the situation that caused the anger. Use wisdom in the timing. Remember, the passions need to cool before resolution can take place. But don't let the sun go down in your anger, Paul tells us. Similar principle. Pursue love as your motivation, even toward your enemies. There's a whole passage that I didn't mention last week, but in Romans that says that we fulfill the law when we love our brother. And I love that text. That we can fulfill the law by doing what? By loving our brother. And of course we have to do that in the power of the Holy Spirit. We live by the Spirit, as Paul says in Romans 8, and talking about the same thing. But we have to love each other. And love is the motivator behind all these things. So pursue love as your motivation, even toward your enemies, Jesus will teach us. Pursue reconciliation and peace. Be a peacemaker. Receive and release forgiveness. That's at the heart of what he's trying to say here. Do it all in the power of the Spirit and in light of the cross. I know it's sometimes hard. It's sometimes hard when we've been hurt. When people have said mean and ugly things about us, when people have gossiped about us, when people have hurt us in whatever way, it's hard. I get that. It's easy to hold grudges. And Jesus says, don't do it. Settle the matter quickly. Nip it in the bud before it becomes out of control. Don't hold back, but extend peace and forgiveness. Oswald Chambers said his commands are difficult, but they become divinely easy once we obey. We take the step of obedience. Just get real practical for just a second here. Step 1, don't be easily provoked to anger. Don't be easily offended, and don't be provoked to anger. And don't let anger be stirred up or fueled in your life. You avoid things that trigger anger. Okay? We all know that there are certain topics that you bring up, it's gonna be a problem. You know, there are certain people, when you get around them, it's gonna be a problem. There are certain situations that trigger these things. We do well often to avoid these things and situations. And sometimes even people, which may lead to anger. And even the scripture tells us these things. James says everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Ecclesiastes 7:9, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, says Proverbs 22:24. Proverbs 19:11, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. There are some times you just kind of let it drop. Okay? There a lot of things that happen to us are not that big a deal. I'm not saying that you need to have a major resolution with someone every time something happens. That's not, I think, what Jesus says here. But when you are deeply hurt and when there is a real issue that needs to be dealt with, we shouldn't avoid it, but we should deal with it when the time is right. Step 2 is sometimes you need to step away and regain your composure. Breathe, find rest for your soul, deal with the passions that are within you before you confront the issue. You know the old anger management techniques. Walk away, count to 10, breathe deeply, count to 100, I don't know, whatever it takes you. Sometimes something, I know somebody who goes and chops wood when he's angry, it's like, there's something about the physical activity, or pounds a nail, there's something about it that helps them get the passion out of the system enough so that they're able to talk more rationally. And I don't think there's anything what Jesus is saying here, saying that we confront each other when we're angry with each other. We have to cool off a bit. And then let's try to deal with the issue, whatever that issue might be. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. We need to get rid of it, Paul says. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. Get rid of such things as anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. You see, there's that vicious cycle again. Anger in all of its forms. He said you need to get rid of that stuff. Get it out of your system and put on the fruit of the Spirit. Step 3, attempt resolution. But do it gently. Do it with a gentle, kind, loving spirit. Don't try to confront somebody in a prideful way. Deal with the real issue as fully as you're able and as quickly as prudent. Apologize and forgive quickly and easily. Don't think you're holding anything by trying to hold on to unforgiveness or anger or malice or whatever it is. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're angry. A gentle answer turns away wrath, Proverbs says. A harsh word stirs up anger. You see what he's saying there? You just yell back, and what happens? It escalates. But a gentle answer helps to deal with the situation. Or in Jesus' words, go and be reconciled. Settle matters quickly. Nip it in the bud. I'm going to give you one last step. I'm done. Cultivate the fruit of the Spirit. Love, gentleness, patience, kindness. These kind of qualities are of infinite value in helping diffuse anger in our lives. These and other character qualities that are built into our lives by the Holy Spirit, as we mature, as we grow, will enable us to deal more maturely with those things that we might be tempted to be offended or hurt by. As we grow in our relationship with Christ, as we become more like Him, those kind of character qualities are so necessary in dealing with those issues that underlie the anger in our lives. So what I'm saying to you is there is hope that as we grow and become like Him, that we can more effectively deal with the anger and the situations that arouse the anger in our lives. The essence of it all is loving people in the power of the Spirit. And it's the essence of fulfilling the law. That's what the essence of it is. That's what Jesus has been saying all along. Romans 13:8. He that loves has fulfilled the law. How do you do this thing? By loving people. And not indulging the anger and allowing it to get to be something even worse and more destructive. But settling issues as best as you can, as quickly as you can, as you are able. And recognize that that hurt that you feel is the reason that Jesus died on the cross in part. It does matter that you've been hurt. And sometimes you just have to take it to the cross and leave it there. Not an easy thing to do, but it's a part of the healing that Jesus wants to bring in our lives. So nip it in the bud. Fulfill the law through love. Let's pray.